Catholicism is a very unique religion for many reasons, but among all the religions, but because mainly of we have God incarnate as the founder of this religion, Jesus Christ, and our belief in the intensity of God's love, his closeness to us, and his great desire to forgive us. That's a very unique position in all the religions that we have alone. You know, in some religions, there is no personal relationship with God whatsoever. In others, God is not forgiving. And in others, there's a limited belief of him forgiving, but no personal relationship. In fact, in Islam, although they believe in heaven, there's two parts to heaven. There's the heaven where, you know, those that get to heaven go, but that's not where God is. God is over here somewhere in his part of heaven because he doesn't want to mingle with them. That's their belief. That's, you know, such a warm and fuzzy God that he has compartmentalized all the people that get there away from himself. So vastly different views. But it's not surprising because we're the only ones that have the fullness of God's self-revelation in the person of Jesus Christ, the Son. And at the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago, the rabbis used to teach you had to forgive 3 times. 3 times was the limit. So if you remember when Peter says to Jesus, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive? Is it 7? What Peter's doing is hoping Jesus will be impressed with him that he's more than doubled what the average was back then. And of course, he was quite shocked to hear back, no, Peter, 70 times 7. You know, that would have been shocking. But then he gives, right after that moment, he gives him a little parable to think about. And in this example, there's a king who has a servant. The servant owes him a great deal of money. It says 10,000 talents. Well, 1 talent was 6,000 days' wages, okay? So 10,000 of those adds up to 60 million days' wages, which means impossible. There's no way to repay that. But the king forgives him, and then the servant goes off and meets another servant, and that second servant owes the first servant some money, 100 denarii. A denarii is a day's wage, so he owes him roughly 3 months' worth of work. That is totally doable. You know, that can be accomplished fairly easy. But sadly, in the translation that we use in the Catholic Church, the New American Bible, it doesn't give you the details. It just says the first servant owed a large debt, and the second servant owed a small debt. Well, that doesn't, it's lost. The whole meaning is lost there because you could be thinking, well, a large debt is maybe $1,000 and a small debt is $10. But both can be paid off, right? No, when you know the reality, there's an impossibility of paying off the first debt. And the reason Jesus did that is to let us know we couldn't get back to the Father on our own. It was impossible because an offense against God has to be mediated by a divine person, and none of us were divine. And so he came and took our flesh so that a divine person could then offer himself up for all the sins we've committed. Why does he tell this story at this point? To let us know God has forgiven such a huge, enormous, great debt to all of you. So you, therefore, with your small sins and infractions against you, you must also forgive the people that have hurt you. Because compared to the way you've hurt God, you're like the 100 denarii, not like the 10,000 talents. And that should sink in. So when he says love your enemy, which is not easy, forgive those who've hurt you, not easy, it's really kind of impossible without his grace. That's also the point. So when I was thinking about this reading today, you know, suddenly it came to mind as I was praying about the homily that in the last few weeks there have been several priests that have been attacked by crazy people in churches during Mass. One of them came up and just knocked the priest right off the altar. There was an event over at St. Peter's Basilica where a guy jumped up on the altar and threw all the candlesticks to the ground. And then most recently, somebody charged the altar during Mass, and the priest kind of shrieked and then ran away, which was probably the worst example of how a manly priest would react. No offense to this priest. He was taken off guard and it was scary, I'm sure. So I start thinking, not preparing the homily, but weeks ago, maybe this is becoming a thing. I should have a plan. What am I going to do? And I thought, well, I guess my gut instinct was just do that like really quick jab to the neck and break his neck. But then one of my new Navy SEAL friends was talking to me about this. He says, no, that's not a good idea, because first of all, you have to get too close to him to do that. If he has a knife, he's going to cut you. He's like, you should carry a knife under all that stuff you have on. I said, what? No, I can't carry a knife, a switchblade to the Mass, and then pull it out and stab somebody, and then finish Mass. That wouldn't work. He's like, okay, then grab a candlestick and just whack him in the head. And I'm like thinking, these would all be recorded on phones. And the first phone call I'm going to get is the bishop. The second's going to be the sheriff. No, that's not responding with love. And by the way, you do have a right to defend yourselves. Absolutely. But then I thought of this other priest who, about 9 years ago, on my second anniversary of my ordination, July 26, 2016, I got up and I remember, because it's your anniversary, it's a big deal. And I was reading through the news, and an article hit the Associated Press that day in France, first world country, there was a priest celebrating Mass, and during the Mass, 3 Muslim terrorists came in and they ran up to him and they basically chopped his head off in the middle of the Mass. And he died, of course. And as the man approached with his machete, this priest looked at him and said, he didn't budge, he didn't scream, he didn't do anything. What he said was, get behind me, Satan. And then they took his life. Father Jacques Hamel. And it's interesting that God would bring that example back to me at the same time as I'm remembering all these recent incidents, because Jacques is now, his cause for canonization has begun, because it's very clear that he was a martyr. He was martyred for the faith. And so, to win the crown of martyrdom, that's the greatest reward you could possibly get. And so again, God's ways are so different than ours. But we have to take this forgiveness seriously, because Jesus himself witnessed to us how to do it. First, in the garden, Peter chopped off somebody's ear with his sword. And I want to let you know, Peter was not aiming for the ear. He was trying to take his head off and got the ear. And Jesus took the ear and reattached it to the man's head supernaturally and totally forgave that man for coming after him to arrest him. That was his first example. And then later on the cross, he forgives all those who are killing him. Father, forgive them. So he modeled how to do it. The biggest pushback I get from people is they say, I'm not ready to forgive. I don't feel like forgiving. Well, forgiveness is not a feeling. It's not a feeling. It's a decision of your will for the good of both the other and yourself. That's what love is. For the good of the other is sacrificial love. So what you have to do is you have to be honest with the Lord and just say, Jesus, I'm so angry this happened. This was a terrible hurt for me. Tragic suffering has occurred in my life because of this, or maybe it wasn't so bad. Whatever it was. But I'm going to choose to forgive this person, and I ask you to forgive them too, so that they can be blessed by you, so they can become the saint you made them to be, so they can get home to heaven. That prayer is so powerful, because what you're doing is saying, I'm going to put aside my feelings and my emotions, and I'm going to forgive and ask you to forgive them so that they can get to heaven. Why would we do that? Well, we do it, one, to help that other person overcome whatever flaw or imperfection they have that's causing them to harm people. But two, for our own peace of mind. Peace comes through forgiveness. I know this from experience in my own life, but also from many other people. You know, one day I met up and had a meal with Immaculée from the Rwandan genocide. She wrote a book. She's pretty famous if you know about the whole thing. But her whole family was, again, macheted to death. And she hid in a little room about 4 by 3 feet with about a dozen other people for days. And they survived. And then the attackers were eventually rounded up. And she forgave them for killing her whole family. And, you know, I said, well, I mean, I understand, you know, you have to do that, but how did you get the grace to do that? And she says, I prayed for the grace to do that because I didn't want to carry that my whole life. And she's a very well-adjusted woman these days. She's living a normal life. She's a very happy soul, very joyful. And she's doing a lot of good by teaching other people how to forgive. The other reason we should be doing it is because God uses the victim to heal the perpetrator. How do we know that? Because that's the perfect victim right there. Sinless, not a single sin. What did he do that for? So that all of us could be forgiven. We are the perpetrators of the crimes, of the sins. And that's why he did it. And so we're a part of the mystical body. He's the head, we're part of the body. When we forgive, we have the same capacity as what he did on the cross. It's similar to, you know, the offering it up your homily I did a week or two ago. By forgiving, we're allowing the grace to come into the world to heal the person that hurt us of whatever thing they're carrying. And then we also are left without having any more baggage left from the hurt that they gave us. This is how he does it. This is how he changes the world. You know, you have to address the person who's doing the hurting. And the way that happens is by grace, by the forgiveness coming out of the one that got hurt. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's actually the way it works. So a couple of pointers when doing this. One is try to imagine the person as a child, because at some point they were pure and simple in nature and with no malice or any ability to hurt people. And that's the same person. They've just been formed wrong over the years. Something happened to them that made them to want to hurt other people. Who knows what it is? That helps. Secondly, always go to the Blessed Mother, because she stood at the cross and watched her son be murdered. And when Jesus said, Father, forgive them, I know for a fact she immediately would have been saying, oh, I do forgive them, because I'm not going to be on the wrong side of this. In fact, she may have been the one that taught him that. Who knows? Separate the sin from the sinner, and make sure you also forgive the secondary or ancillary players in the crime. Sometimes there's people that egg people on to do bad things. Sometimes there's people that are supporting people to do bad things. You know, they have to be forgiven too. I remember, you know, with the whole scandal with the priests, that was a horrible thing. It was a terrible thing, unforgivable, you could say, but it has to be forgiven. But those bishops that moved those priests equally, if not even more responsible to let that keep happening. You know, so I had to forgive them too. And finally, offer up your prayers and your masses and your rosaries for the people that hurt you, because there's a power there. First of all, it lets you know you have a power to do something, but also that power goes out and transforms the people that are doing the hurting. You know, and let's not forget, we have been there too. All of us have hurt somebody at one point or another too, so we're not innocent in that regard either. And this is what God does with his people. He brings about restoration and healing by our forgiveness, and not only transforms us, but even the ones who hurt us.